though. It doesn't seem like it was our parents. It seems like it was a whole group of people that we don't really know. I'm not exactly sure why. What I think is going on in this generation, the hip hop generation was battling against the American government and the system. I think the hip hop generation was first battling against, parents and, just the angst of being young, and then the community situations that we were in. Originally, hip hop was about, I like saying hip hop was about taking what you have and making it into what you want. We didn't have art in the schools. It was the middle of Reaganism. We didn't have art in the schools. Brothers created art anyway on the subways. And I think my generation, the hip hop generation, started off by being really creative with what we were dealt, and then got horribly exploited in the early 90s by corporations and multimedia companies, and that the civil rights generation didn't know how to deal with us. It would have been beautiful if we can go back in time and find a way for the two generations to have met at that point, and the civil rights generation helped promote the aspects of hip hop that were positive. But we ended up having a big clash in the mid-90s that led to the corporations completely taking over, and the culture that I love stopped representing me. I'm a grown man with a business and a family, and I can't see anybody on television who looks like me saying that they're part of the hip hop generation. So that's hopefully one of the things we'll get into today.
I heard Malcolm say that we need to look past civil rights and move towards trying to gain human rights. I think that was the ultimate struggle. But in 1968, I was 8 years old, so I didn't have a clue. But I seen what was going on, and I seen enough to ask my mom, who was a single parent, what's going on? Then when Marvin Gaye asked the question, what's going on, I was old enough then to kind of look into it. So when you talk about revolution, revolution is complete, constructive, conscious, cosmic change. So when you talk about civil rights revolution, I've seen civil rights change some things in the immediate community where I live. I've seen hip hop revolution, hip hop meaning higher infinite power healing our people. I've seen that revolution, the mind revolution that Public Enemy set in motion, change things on a global scale. I was talking to Cheryl earlier, and we were talking about how hip hop is a blessing and a curse. How hip hop has the medium of the internet and the media working in its behalf. And I told Cheryl, it may be a blessing and a curse, because have you heard of Soulja Boy? You understand what I'm saying? So that may be a blessing and it may be a curse to know that you can make a film one night, put it on YouTube, make a song the same night, and get it across the globe instantaneously, throughout the globe. That may be a blessing and a curse depending upon the message that you're sending out and to who you're sending it out to. So civil rights revolution and the hip hop revolution has something in common. And we need to dive into what that is today. I'm gonna leave that open. Thank you.
I think in 1968, clearly I was born in 1970, so I was probably something called a thought. But I would imagine 1968, my father was, of course, dealing with SNCC. I'm a civil rights baby, so many of you know that. I grew up around civil rights movement. And to me, civil rights means organization. When I think of civil rights, I think of organization. I think of hard work. I think of family values. I think of family. I think of community. Those are the things that come to mind when I think about civil rights. As it relates to, I think, a social movement. I think of a social revolution. Okay. I think of something called, they say, by any means necessary. I think that what has happened from the civil rights generation to my generation, any means necessary didn't bring along the definition of any means necessary. And that's why you see in some areas of hip hop, you see people are still trying to improve from the social to the economics, but the economics sometimes takes on a bad way of any means necessary. Because yes, people are still prospering, but they also are still prospering in a way that's demoralizing to our community.
Civil rights emerged from an intact African-American community. The teachers and the lawyers and the doctors lived right beside the workers, and the kids went to school in the neighborhood, right? Martin wanted civil rights, but to a better society, a society that didn't have poverty, a society that didn't have war. But Malcolm said, that's never going to happen, along with the Black Panthers, and they said, a separate community. But the truth is, the young people thought Malcolm and Martin, and I was young then, Malcolm and Martin were old guys. They were old guys like the parents, and what we wanted the most was not to be like our parents. We found our parents to be pathetic. If we were poor, we found them to be pathetic and irrelevant. If we were middle class, we found them to be pathetic, boring, and irrelevant. We didn't want to be like them. But of course, what happened is that some people who were poor left and became middle class. They moved out of the black community. Some people who were already middle class became middle class, and we left a ghetto isolated by class, isolated by race, poor and angry, and I think justifiably so. It was very clear to me from the beginning that this was a new art form. It was very clear to me that this was a significant social statement. It was very clear to me that my colleagues, both black and white, were a little bit ridiculous when they complained about the music, but not about the culture that it reflected, not about the poverty that the music came out of. So that was clear to me. And again, Professor Grif said, when I think of the civil rights movement, I think of a movement that's trying to get to people, but how did we do it? We did it in churches, we did it in synagogues, we did it by demonstrating and hoping the paper would represent the numbers accurately, which they never did. And when I think of hip hop, I think of an immediate electronic community who can communicate with the world, and I envy that. I envy that power, I envy that potential to create a worldwide revolution, to do it much better than we did it.
What does the civil rights revolution movement struggle mean to me? First, it begins long before the 20th century. Men like Prince Hall, Richard Allen, George Lawrence, who began the struggle for enfranchisement and the emancipation of Americans held in captivity, Africans held in captivity. Their struggle continued through the Civil War with the accomplishment of ending the tyranny of slavery. But during the war itself, there was a very clear stand for civil rights by the soldiers, who refused to take the inequity in pay because they understood it. If they did, they would be accepting second-class citizenship. So they were involved in a civil rights struggle, a struggle that continued to the day that I was born in 1958. I came of age in terms of understanding there was a world out there where there was a need for a struggle for civil rights when I was 5 years old. My father was a civil rights leader in Oklahoma, and we were cautioned to be very quiet about what was going on because there was an active terrorist campaign being waged against our community. In 1968, I was almost 10 years old when Dr. King was assassinated. My mother said that a new day was dawning, and though Dr. King had been assassinated, I was responsible for keeping his legacy alive and living the resurrection. So what does the civil rights movement mean to me? It means that I have a responsibility to carrying on a legacy, a verifiable commitment to liberty and justice for all, to include all of hip hop.
What happens to young people in the hip hop generation when they begin to see the world around them with new eyes and a broad vision? As people got a new vision and a new sense of the world, found a new voice, how have you, from your perspective, where do you think the generation, where are they going with it? Because I think that's been part of the struggle.
I think there's a breaking point. It really happens right around the time of NWA. I tell people all the time, people accuse the hip hop generation of inventing drug dealing, pimping, and murder. We definitely didn't invent it. We were the first generation to be honest about it in our music. There was a time and a place where hip hop was balanced. We were talking